Welcome back to the podcast. Super excited today to have Stephen Gay and John Finger joining us to talk about Mode Maison Labs. Stephen is the co-founder and CEO. John is the COO. Integral pair. Mode Maison is a groundbreaking digital platform that's transforming the world of luxury retail. The company is at the forefront of blending cutting-edge tech with immersive storytelling. And everyone that's been following Metaversal knows that storytelling is at our core. But Mode Maison is creating a fully digitized shopping experience that's nothing else, certainly nothing else we have seen, and I don't think anything else that you'll have seen. It's the first platform of its kind and building a foundation on digital assets, harnessing, you guessed it, state-of-the-art AI to craft what they call digital DNA. It's a revolutionary approach that captures the essence of luxury products down to their smallest detail. And by pushing the boundaries of personalization and sustainability, Mode Maison is redefining how luxury home goods are discovered, how they are purchased, and how they are experienced. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us.
I want to jump in, Stephen. I know that you came from the fashion industry. You were the youngest concept designer at Ralph Lauren not too long ago. I want you to tell us about that experience in retail and how it became the basis for building the digitized generative retail model of the future.
Yeah, so it all kind of started at Ralph. I was put out of school a little early to join the concept team there. And the whole kind of goal with the very small team that we had was to build kind of like these dream worlds where then the products would kind of be designed into. So while there, it was constantly about, building these beautiful worlds, so to speak. And we'd be doing it physically in concept frames and just constantly pulling inspiration and just kind of like, again, building what we call like movies or stories or worlds.
But what's an example of that? Is it the Winter Wonderland theme for Ralph in Colorado? Is it the Texas, cowboy theme?
So I was always partial to the kind of the Western cowboy theme because I'm from Texas, but
we won't hold that against
a George O'Keeffe kind of like beautiful scene of the desert, kind of like a movie and the story kind of that revolves around that. So, creating the textures, the color palettes, the kind of the look, the vibe, the feel, like who that person was. And, we could only go so far. And so we constantly be building those worlds. And then, I think Ralph does it better than anybody in terms of building out these stories. And so we'd have these huge concept rooms where in some of them, there would literally be like planes, like quite literal planes. They would reconstruct. So we'd try to recreate these incredible worlds. So I keep doing that, but like kind of you get immersed in. But again, you can only get so far. So kind of taking that kind of like inspiration, insight, and then kind of like knowing what was out there in terms of what you could do digitally. I thought, all right, there's got to be a new way where we could actually just create these beautiful dream worlds to the nth degree, just push it that much further in the kind of the virtual world. Because again, like the sky's the limit when it comes to what you can do digitally. The kind of the thing that I always say is that if we wanted to put Jacques Cousteau on a chair on Mars, we could do that. I don't know why you would, but we could do that.
You might. I want to just level set because, I find this part super interesting, which is the historical way that these brands are doing storytelling feels a bit like mini theater, a bit like mini cinema. Ostensibly, you're trying to convince a shopper like John to envision himself in that scene, that he feels inspired, right? That's aspirational. He wants to be the cowboy. John has always wanted to be the cowboy. I should say, since we didn't during the introduction, John and I know each other for over 20 years because we went to college together and we were fraternity brothers. In fact, he was president of the fraternity and I was the bursar, which means I had to pay all of John's bills, and they were large. There was no waste or abuse, but they were large bills. and he was running a great operation. So that's how we know each other. So I put him on the spot saying, what inspires John to go and make that purchase? Stephen, maybe you can give us a little more insight. The traditional way things are being produced seems like a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of personnel, and a lot of cost.
Yeah. So there's several things here. So first of all, you're just assuming that there's only one movie going on in any given season. There's typically 4, 5, or 6, a collection, so to speak. And that's within men's, and that's within one brand. So then you have women's, you have children's, like the costs are almost untenable. Like when you think about it, we're talking, tens of millions of dollars. And also we're working typically in the fashion kind of a world, they're typically working 2 years prior to the actual season going out. So it's just so inefficient. People have been trying to work on this problem for a long time. So not only just
Talk about trying to predict where the puck is going. 2 years in advance, you're already concepting what John will want to wear 2027.
Exactly. And on the experience side, it's also just like, it's so limiting in terms of the physical limitations of how far you can go within the kind of the realm of storytelling, and kind of unlocking that creativity is just so limiting. So there's just so many constraints in the physical world. And it's almost just a non-starter when we're talking about the amount of content that's going out today and kind of these dream worlds that brands need to create. You're really up against a lot. So if you can basically, the thesis is, if you can basically do all of that, but in a computer or via digital experiences, then it's almost like the holy grail, because not only do you eliminate costs, which is really not the whole goal for us. It's an incredible byproduct, don't get me wrong. The whole goal is just to enable more creativity that are not basically limited by your physical limitations.
Right. And to better understand that, if you are on location, taking photographs or video, filming something, you have a certain set amount of time. There's models, there's actors, there's a rented space, there's food and catering trucks, right? It can't go on forever. So your ability to iterate is likely limited in the physical traditional way. If I understand what you're saying correctly, the ability then to do this digitally, you're only limited by your imagination. John can sit there putting the inputs, clicking the button as many times as he desires until he gets what he considers as the perfect scene to be able to position that product and inspire that shopper.
100%. And that's, so we'll probably get into it in a second, but even the act of clicking and creating that scene iteratively is something we're working on doing away with entirely. So there's a barrier there too, because if we just move the barrier, like the physical constraint barriers in the physical world, you could maybe make that same argument, not maybe, you could absolutely make that same argument when it comes to the digital barriers in terms of the education needed and all the tooling and all this stuff, the tools, just the workflows. It really is limiting in terms of like how much content you create in all these dream worlds you can create in a digital atmosphere. It's maybe more complex, honestly, in the digital realm. So we've had to rethink basically everything from the ground up.
It's a big undertaking. And I know you mentioned cost, right? Tens of millions that are typically spent for large brands. I have heard anecdotally that just one photo that I might flip through in a magazine typically costs $10,000.
Whoa, way more. Hold on. I don't even, you got that in your early ground. Yeah. So we're talking
I'm a value shopper. I'm a value shopper. So maybe at the places that I shop.
Okay. I don't know where you're shopping, but no, we're talking like millions of dollars per photo shoot, and you're getting, it's single assets. Like we're talking, couple assets that you can actually use. So it doesn't make any sense. It's even crazy for us to talk about a single frame or single image or asset, because what you see is what you get. That's it. When you create things digitally in a virtual world, it's infinite.
So let's pick up on that and talk about Mode Maison's digital core infrastructure, which is really the underpinning of the digitized future that you guys have been working on and that you're describing here with us. So can you share for all of our listeners, what does digital core mean? Because that's a made up word, it's a term of art. And how is digital core allowing brands to take ownership of their assets in a way that really hasn't been possible before? Because you're already touching.
Yeah. So I guess just to back up real quick before we get to digital core, essentially the way we see the future of retail or commerce, or just really just everything going, is that we really think it's going to be an interconnected web of, digitized systems, products, processes, experiences, and capabilities wholesale. That's going to make up like kind of our lives going forward. And so in order to enable a fully interconnected, system or ecosystem where you can have digital assets and then actually create those digital assets in the real world, you kind of have to take a very first principles approach. And this is kind of where the genesis of this idea of digital war came from. So right now, everybody's chasing this problem of digitization at several different layers or different altitudes. But what nobody's really done is somebody needs to come in and just define the most basic infrastructure to be able to scale everything else up. And so right now you have all these different tools and different workflows and different technologies that basically are entirely subjectively driven, and they're not based in the real world. They're not based in real world physics. And if you want to create products in a computer and you want to scale that up across different ecosystems and then ultimately make it in the real world, well, you need real physical, real world data to be able to leverage and to drive all your AI going forward.
So I just want to jump in real quick because at the top, Dan, you talked about luxury and you talked about home goods a bit, but just think about as we speak, think about just materials wholesale, whether it's a shirt or a sofa or a metal. This is quite literally, this is relevant for any material at all. So when we talk about digital DNA, digital core, it is an infrastructure that is entirely just like that. Whatever that is the thing.
A man purse. That's where I put
my
so
digital core basically is the representation or the simulation of physical materials in the virtual world. So if you have a fabric in the real world, it's taking a sensor, basically taking all the data from physical sensors and then bringing that into a computer. The analogy I'll make here is kind of similar to Tesla. So before Tesla or autonomous vehicles were widespread, everybody tried to tackle the problem of autonomous vehicles or autonomy via a hard-coded approach. So just via algorithms alone. But as we know, there's an infinite amount of scenarios that a car could come across. An infinite amount of grandmas can be walking across the street or deer or whatever you say. There's just infinite variability. So it's really an impossible problem to solve if you don't leverage real world data. So then what Tesla did essentially and why they made this huge breakthrough was they embedded sensors in cars, were able to leverage the data they captured from sensors and then create synthetic data sets and basically these large foundation models to then drive all their simulation and all their capabilities going forward. That same thing is needed for everything outside of autonomous vehicles. It doesn't just stop at autonomous vehicles. It's more needed across everything else. There's an infinite possibilities of materials in the real world, to be specific. And so right now, the status quo is, okay, let's create materials in a computer, but via code. Well, there's an infinite amount of materials too. So in order to kind of like level set, in order to kind of like, you need a very first principles approach. And that's kind of where this idea of digital core came out. And it's taking a first principles, real world embedded sensor approach to driving the future of digitization and simulation.
All right. So you guys have a hardware component, the total material appearance capture system, TMAC, but you're not alone. There are other groups out there that have high fidelity scanning devices. So I want you to explain a little bit of the differentiation, because I know your CTO in Europe, Jakob, has spent a lot of blood and treasure developing the TMAC, and you have deployed it. You have deployed it already successfully for a number of years with major companies that are indeed utilizing in the way you're describing, getting ready for this digitized future. Give us a little color about that component.
Yeah, John, do you want to touch on that?
So the one differentiator right off the bat is size. It allows us to create higher fidelity maps. And basically, if you think about when you digitize, and it's very easy. I'm not a technical person, but it's simply, if you put a swatch of material on the device, you press a button, and then you have seamlessly tieable maps that help comprise. So imagine the DNA of a certain material. So one differentiator is size. Typically you're capped at a A4, A7 paper size. Ours is 1.3 by 1.3 meters. So it's much more flexible. And I think we would stand by the fact that our outputs are that much better. So we're closer to the reality than having somebody push a button and then a person on a team having to spend hours, if not days, entirely subjectively to create that material. I might be doing it one way. Person next to me may see it differently. You may be doing it a different way. We're all trying to get to the same output, but really what you end up having is multiple variations of the same thing. Whereas we're taking subjectivity entirely out of the picture. You press the button, it's an objective view of it. And that's how we're thinking about
and
it.
And what you want to produce is a realistic version of this shirt, as an example, that captures all the curvature, the way the fabric moves, right? That's part of this unlock. Am I right, Stephen?
So yeah, we want to be able to design products inside of a computer where we can limit all sampling and all kind of physical costs associated with the designing of any product. Because at Ralph, we'd spend millions of dollars every season just in sampling costs alone. Also, let's talk about sustainability implications. So if you can basically eliminate all the overhead in terms of sampling costs when it comes to the amount of burn of fabric that never see the light of day in production, we're talking huge elimination of kind of those fabrics that basically just end up in the landfill, and enabling kind of designers to design products inside of computer first. So that's really important. And then also ultimately, you need a product that you can actually sell in a computer. And so that requires an incredible level of fidelity, because at the end of the day, if I'm a designer, which I used to be, and it's not looking exactly one-to-one how it's going to look in the real world whenever it's produced, well, then it's a non-starter. So it's a really hard problem to solve, but I think that the future there and what that will enable and what that means is pretty huge. So what we're trying to do is basically enable product creation inside of a computer, and then enable experiences and people to be able to sell a product or to see a product before anything has ever been made. And so that kind of transforms retail and flips it on its head, where you unlock a fully digitized, what people call PLM, product lifecycle management system, or supply chain. It eliminates all SKUs. I mean, it eliminates all stock. There's just a whole lot of implications.
It's quite, I'm newer to this space than Stephen is, obviously, but it's quite archaic, and it's really surprising given all the technology that's available and all the breakthroughs we're doing across, AI.
Is it surprising? They've always done it one way, and people keep buying. So they continue to do it. Environment be damned. Let's just produce the material and we'll burn it. Right? It's terrible.
Yeah. But again, it is so time consuming, and the amount of people. And again, we're talking 2 years production run basically in terms of or design phases within fashion. Why is that? The question is, why is that? It's because of all the shit we're talking about, because of all the stuff we're talking about right now, in terms of the actual designing and sampling and, it's just, we can eliminate all of that.
So I want to move on to, the first time I met Stephen, it was through a mutual acquaintance, someone who is very experienced in the retail space. And I recall being wowed and inspired by the breadth of Stephen's vision. He's a real, change maker and dreamer. John, the reason I think this pairing was particularly interesting is John is a realist. So, John, when you think about, the uptake, what has been your observation? Companies are already beginning to engage with ModeMaison Labs. We know it's still early days, but you're in front of them. What do you see is happening? And I'll put that question to you. And then Stephen, when you talked about material and the importance of where the puck is headed, I recall Jensen at NVIDIA talking about the importance of material and proprietary data in one of his big product confabs. So maybe you could just remind us why he has said that that's going to be so vital. Do you want to do it in reverse order?
Yeah. So that's one of the things that Jensen always talks about is materials. We've been talking about it since day one. That's the whole reason we day one being several years ago. We think the materials unlock everything ultimately downstream. So the world is comprised of materials. Everything that we interact with is all materials. And so we think that that's why digital core is so important. So if all products are made out of materials and even our world and everything's based in physics, then whoever has that data and whoever can recreate materials that's physics-based, that actually is based in real world physics inside of a computer, unlocks this, what we're trying to go after, but so much more, because basically everything is material. So that's really what Jensen's talking about. And I think that the reason that we get excited about, being in discussion with them, some of their teams, and I think vice versa, is because I think we see things the same way. Everything starts with materials.
So I'll just jumping in. So, we are in front of multi-billion-dollar corporations, and we're in front of small studios with a couple people. They all have a similar challenge, right? They have this legacy infrastructure that they've kind of either inherited or they've built, and it's become cumbersome and bloated over time. And again, I think they realize that digital product creation is the way of the future. It's like, how do you just stop what you're doing and then adopt it? So the TMAC is that mechanism. Again, you still do need some infrastructure to take those materials and to make a shirt or a sofa or whatever it is. And Stephen will talk, I think, maybe a little bit later about a future where right out the box, there you get the product immediately. But, especially coming out of COVID for me, you're at home and you're shopping, you're not going anywhere. And then when I met Stephen, he's painting this picture of this hyper-personalized one-to-one consumer experience where everything was designed for a customer in real time. And that really resonated. And I think that's what other big brands are seeing now is how do we shift our entire infrastructure and systems to create products to be able to deliver on that future promise. And it does start with materials. And it does start with this TMAC. And the TMAC is, it's been created across academia and some research institutions and really smart people on the engineering side. And really that is kind of like that is the first entry point into this future of digital product creation. And again, it could be for a 2-person shop that's just doing one specific type of product, or a multi-billion-dollar shop that has, a suite of products that they're offering their clients.
I know you've had some unusual meetings with government agencies as well, who are thinking about some of the same principles, which is single source of truth, material DNA, and they can model different outcomes based on that. So I find that fascinating. I want to ask Stephen about this idea. If we're making products digitally, how are you thinking about verifying ownership, not just of the digital manifestations, but also of the digital twins, right? There's a digital twin of my shirt. And can you talk about how that data ends up being the digital fingerprint for those twins?
Yeah. So this all kind of goes hand in hand. So again, when you start to talk about what this kind of future landscape is probably going to look like, and it will definitely look like, the model kind of flips, the ownership model flips a bit, where it really starts at the source of the manufacturer. So if a manufacturer like a mill, for instance, is digitizing all their materials, and then basically anybody can leverage that asset to create really any product with that material. Well, then how does the manufacturer, I guess ultimately they will manufacture the textile, for instance, in this case, but how does that ownership model look, I guess? I think that, whereas we have brands today, again, I'm always say I'm the biggest brand guy, I love brands, but it's really hard to think that the model for brands is going to remain the same down the road, because basically anybody can create any product at any time in a computer, and it's entirely democratized in that sense. Then it's just hard to think that the ownership model remains. So basically you'll have an asset, I think, that basically starts and is created by, in some cases, the mill. So they scan a material, they possibly tokenize that basically that asset, and they're able to follow it along the entire chain. And anybody who wants to put that asset or, use that material on any one of their products, well, then they can do so. And then basically if the brand is, or if that person basically now creates that product in the real world, then some sort of royalty exchange or some sort of royalty model is happening. So everybody's kind of benefiting. Or let's even take like a brand, for instance. So like you have the like an Hermes Birkin bag. They own that kind of that IP. There was that
There was
legal case.
litigation over that in the digital
Exactly.
context. Someone tried
And
to sell
so-
Birkin and it wasn't them.
Exactly. So we're seeing that, that probably is going to be the model going forward, where it's certain people have IP around different tech products. They own that kind of that digital ID or that digital asset. And then maybe not Hermes, but anybody kind of is able to use that asset to some degree. But then the brand or whoever it is should be getting some sort of kickbacks or royalties because they were the one who introduced it to the world. So I think that right now it's pretty archaic in the sense that ownership model is very, it's very stale. And I think that the future, kind of like when you have all these digital assets flying around, the ownership model has to change. And let's not to say that, like, I think we'll probably get into it in a second, but this idea of what digitization allows for and where we're really focused on in the future, that even transforms even more in terms of the ownership component.
I do want to talk about ownership in just a minute, but before we do, I want to talk about talent. John mentioned there's a lot of very smart people at Mode Maison Labs working on this. So how did you identify, how did you recruit, how did you put together this core team of very smart people? Where are they? I mentioned that the CTO, Jakob, is in Europe. You're in Texas. Tell us a little bit about the crew that's on the field.
Yeah, so that's probably the thing that I take probably the most pride in is being able to get people that otherwise would be very difficult to do. And so the skinny of it is that I'll write these love letters basically to people that we have no business writing love letters to.
You write love letters.
I'll write love letters. Yeah.
Persistence,
write
John.
love letters.
Persistence.
Point where they probably are telling the FBI, let's put this kid on the watch list basically, because he's sending me way too many and he knows way too much about me and everything about me. So I'm probably on a bunch of blacklists. Actually, we know we are at least on one blacklist. But anyway, that said, we're super passionate about what we're doing. We're very bullish about kind of this future. And so we will go to the ends of the earth to just get the best and the brightest across disciplines on to the same team.
So you will go and study the best academics. You will go and study the best researchers or scientists, and you will pursue them. I won't say you'll stalk them, but you'll certainly gather a lot of info.
Yeah.
Right. And your love letters is the entree, and it has worked. On a number of occasions, people have actually responded and said, you kind of scare me, but I'm passionate about it.
Yeah. But I think, I was not a recipient of one of these love letters, so maybe I need a mulligan there, but
always tomorrow.
One thing I will say is that, it is the talent begets talent. We all know that, you start to get these really interesting people who are looking at huge tech companies who kind of can imagine some sort of trajectory. But what we have uniquely, obviously, is this talent that we're talking about, but we have the data. And that was always what was striking to me, is that we have what other folks can't buy because there is no use case to get this data for them. And that is also crucial because in academia, and Steve and I have talked about this a lot, and us too, Dan, is that a lot of the big breakthroughs are not happening in academia anymore.
The model shifted. There's a brain drain. So what's happened historically is all the deepest of tech is being implemented or at least started within the world of academia. But now, because of basically everything being entirely predicated on data, or in a lot of cases, it's almost entirely predicated on data, especially with these AI models. You need some sort of mechanism or system in place to be able to collect or to generate that data. And so there's just no mechanism within academia. There's no economic incentive basically to be able to create that data. And so it's coming from industry now. And so you're seeing this huge brain drain we have been for the past 10 years of the top scientists from across the world of the academia coming into the private institutions. And so we're able to leverage that uniquely, like John was saying. And the other thing is that the data sets, like you're saying, it's money can't buy it. So it's not a money thing. You also still have to have the mechanism. And so because we're uniquely positioned with some of the biggest manufacturers, putting these TMACs on factory floors, collecting the data uniquely, we have these data sets to be able to, unlock this new future, what we call Mode 1.0, this foundation model, this spatial intelligence model. And
So if
All right. So
you're a PhD,
go ahead, John.
you spend your career, getting your master's and your doctorate, and once you come across these data sets, it is very enticing to come over to private sector where we have been building and assembling these teams that can actually leverage data sets today.
So in his love letter, that there's a little chimichurri sauce that he's putting there saying, we happen to already have uniquely qualified team members, but we'd love for you to join this. We have proprietary data. I hear you talking about. I want to pick up on diving into the AI component of this a little bit more. You mentioned a la Mode 1.0. Makes me think of ChatGPT 1.0. No one was talking about ChatGPT when it was in 1.0 mode, but
3.5 when everybody started talking about it.
Okay. So we have these LLMs, right? Large language models that are tackling text. We have diffusion models that incorporate sights and sounds. Mode Maison is building world models. That's what you started today telling us about. Share a little bit more about how those world models will fit in to this quilt of different AI models that are already being constructed, that people are already using. What do world models actually do for those that have never heard about it? And why are they so important? And what is the special chimichurri sauce that you guys have when it comes to building those world models?
All right. So loaded question. I could talk about this for 5 years probably, but I'll try to be concise. So if we take a step back, again, like you're saying, we have LLMs that's been around for a while, but that really is like, it's based on 2D, kind of like 2D text data, language data, and it's entirely subjective data. And so we're basically at the point, I think a New York Times article came out not too long ago about basically we scraped all the data in the world. There's only so much we can go. So basically that is kind of true, but you have different architectures, model architectures that will kind of like keep us going forward. But there's only so much you can do with that. Now, we're going to look back, I think, in a couple of years and say, okay, that was a little kid brother. That was, that wasn't even first inning when it comes to AI, what we can do with AI. Because what we're talking here is actually incorporating physics in our physical world and taking it way, way, way further. So it's not just subjective kind of language models and being able to understand from that, but actually building multimodal foundation models that are based in space, in our three-dimensional space, and that are based in real world physics. And why that's important, exactly, our spatial constraints and our spatial data. Why that's important for us, at least. I mean, I know it's kind of like it's a long way of trying to get here, but it's a critical way. For us, it's important because if we can basically build this large world model, LWM, everybody has a different word for it. Some people call it spatial models. Some people call it large world models. We actually call it unified world models or unified models.
Unified world model. Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of playing around with that. So yeah, but I think UWMs is it's more on the nose for what we're doing compared to what other people are doing, because they're really just trying to incorporate the spatial dimension as well. And what I mean space, I mean three-dimensional space, geometry. So you have an image, which is 2D, it's flat. And then we all live in the 3D world. But then we also live in a physics-based world, a physically based world. So there's another component to that. And so we are basing everything on physical data and also spatial data. So it's important because if we're talking about a system or a mechanism, or I guess this model, they can effectively create things that ultimately you need to create in the real world. Because again, we live in the real world. We're very real about that. Then you need a model that understands the real world to some degree, right? So it's really important. One, let me just, I guess, back up real quick. Like one highlighting factor, one kind of thing that illuminates kind of what I'm talking about is let's think about Midjourney, for instance. Midjourney is a diffusion model. It basically, for lack of a better term, mashes 2D pixels together. That's why you have, in some cases, that used to be where they can never generate just a regular hand. It would be like with 7 fingers. And if you step back and ask yourself, well, why was that? Was there a bunch of training data on a bunch of 7-fingered dudes, basically, that was as inputs? Well, probably not. It was because that's based on the assumption that it understands a digit or a finger from a hand. It doesn't. It has no intelligence. It doesn't understand anything. It doesn't have any 3D understanding. So in order
is this why you might end up with a Midjourney someone sitting on top of a chair, but actually the leg is going the wrong direction, that it doesn't have that spatial awareness that I hear you describing?
Exactly. And the SOAR model that if it ever comes out, who knows at this point, it's been, a year probably now, of OpenAI's, video model that they cherry pick, not to go too deep, but they cherry pick some of the better videos probably. And then some of these videos even have like dogs forming out of other dogs, like if you really look at it slowly. So it's like that stuff. It's, well, that's probably not ever going to happen in the real world. So if we're trying to incorporate like manufacturers and enable manufacturers and brands and commercial type partners to be able to leverage AI, well, then it needs to be one that's physically based. And so one thing to give a very specific example why it's important for us, and there's a whole lot of downstream benefits in terms of like robotics and a lot of other things, but what we're really focused on is for brands. And so if a brand basically has a physical manifestation of their product, or digital manifestation, of a physical product, so a 3D model, and then if they have the materials digitized via the TMAC, then what if they could basically take those and drag and drop it into some sort of interface, like a la Mode interface, and say, hey, put this chair, this beautiful XYZ chair in a Lake Como Palazzo, and put this lady sitting on it with their legs crossed. And within a matter of seconds, it's done. And then, hey, actually change shirts on that lady with my shirt that I want to give it. That's done. And then also, let's take it one step further. So it's not only that they're working with the tools of brands themselves, that's where the elimination of overhead comes in. 80% of overhead is just eliminated overnight based on that capability alone. But then you take it one step further, and what if we could actually embed that capability so that generative capability generate a product in any world into any website that has a video or an image in it currently. So just like YouTube has their embedded player, what if you could basically take a la Mode and have embed mode? So that's what we're working on right now, is to be able to use user preference and user data and user prompts, basically, where, Dan, we know the past 7 purchases from your Google Analytics data, the past 7 times out of the 10 times you purchase something, there's been something red in the image. You don't know that, but we can figure it out through Google Analytics. Well, we'll probably generate, every time you go onto that site, we'll generate you images with things that are red in it. So a brand
Red Thorlo socks. I've never purchased a red Thorlo sock, but I stand by the product. I'm willing to try it. You made me think of...
It's a zero fail mission. That's what we say internally. It's a zero fail mission for retail. We're not creating, puppies playing in snow. We have to sell the product. At the end of the day, it is a absolute non-starter.
Has to be real. Has to
not look exactly like it does.
It can't kind of look like it. You have to make it. Where there's
You mentioned puppies. I want to tell you that on my flight last night, I felt that there was a dog the size of this animal, definitely defied logic and spatial intelligence, because when I walked to the bathroom, you saw the dog spanning 3 rows, and it's just not, why is the tail back here in 19? I saw the head in 17, but I won't labor my JetBlue experience to you.
That's on the roadmap. We'll fix that next.
Speaking of roadmap, we talked a little bit about AI. Let's talk finally about the Gen AI platforms, right? Because embedded in what I hear you describing is this future that's highly micro-personalized, that is going to be specific to Dan, and there's going to be generating images and content, which I'm going to be most receptive to, right? Today, I often get stuff in the mail, and I certainly get hit with targeted advertisements that have absolutely no appeal to me whatsoever. You're describing a future where, based on my past behavior, based on what brands will begin to discern about me, based on what information, ideally, I am willing to disclose in the universe we envision at MetaVersal, that I start to own more of my digital data and can decide selectively who and when to disclose that data to, get away from the targeted advertising models that have built Google, Facebook. But let's talk about Gen AI platforms for commerce and retail specifically, because these platforms have shown their merit with regard to ideation and inspiration, but it's unclear today that they're commercially viable. What say you?
So I guess there's two audiences we can speak to. So on one hand, you have the creatives and the kind of the storytellers, and then on the other hand, you have the kind of the CEOs and the C-suite business type executives. We uniquely speak to both of them. So when it comes from a creativity perspective, what I tell my friends in, like my fashion friends, it's that, look, creativity is enabled here. So what we're enabling you to do is create that world of that movie, to kind of tie it back to the very beginning of what we talked about. You create these worlds, these movies, you create these parameters, essentially. I want to create this beautiful, Western, Italian kind of world. Well, then you create it. You basically give, and what I mean by creating specifically is like by giving, creating these mini models on top of this foundation model via images, via text, via video, and kind of explaining what that world looks like. And then basically you create these worlds, but then you enable through embed mode, for instance, where basically it generates their products in any world imaginable. It generates based on the user. And so we're enabling via embed mode users to be immersed fully into these movies on a high personalized level. So brands and creatives will set the parameters and set the dream for these kind of worlds they want to create. And then as a consumer, I go into a website. Every time I go into a website, it knows me better than probably I know me, just because Google knows everybody and everything. And so it's able to use that to then incorporate you into these stories. So if I know, Dan, you're pretty tall, you're 6'2", white male out of, Brooklyn or whatever, but I know that you have X amount of kids or whatever, well, then it can start generating you and your kids and kind of really show you, like, it'll show more of you in these kind of images or in these scenes. And it'll really just kind of be a more high personalized experience for you to really kind of like fall in love with these products. But then when I talk to the business side of things, what this enables, again, is it really enables you to just optimize heavily and not have to it eliminates a ton of waste, and waste being time spent, but it also meaning physical waste. So it's really great across the board. I know there's going to be a lot of people that kind of get kind of caught up in the, oh my gosh, well, it's taking away designers or it's taking away productions. Well, it's not really, because you're actually enabling more creativity. That's the whole reason we went about this. It was not about the elimination of, I guess, waste or sampling. It's a great product, honestly, but byproduct, but yeah, it is really something for everybody.
We're going to be talking here at Metaversal in the near future about how we leverage AI, not to displace jobs, but actually to transition, transform, and upskill people to take advantage, to leverage AI to unlock that creativity that you're describing. So I think you're precisely right. I want to wrap us up with a final question. John should go first, and then Stephen, I want to hear your answer, which is, if we go in the Wayback Machine, what was the first thing that you ever owned?
I think, I think about collectibles that I went to a store with my own money to buy. And that was probably in the form of baseball cards, the ones with the tops with the gum in them. Got the pack, looked through it. You put it in the folder,
Silver, the sleeve.
You felt like that was yours, put in the special place, refer to it, try to build that collection. I need to get this one, I need to get that one. Probably that, because it was a function of both having used my own money to get something and then caring for it, which I think is part of ownership.
A lot of longer mode in order to
dated myself with all those references now, but yeah.
Look, unfortunately, 1980s was a high production time for Topps and all those other card manufacturers. So we rest assured that all of your cards are worthless, but we love the effort.
Yeah.
Stephen?
I have a very different idea of ownership. So there's three things. So one was like this leather jacket. It was actually a Ralph Lauren jacket. I still have it, I think. One that I saved up for and got it. Another one was, we're talking about just owning things, right? Another one was, I used to be a DJ in a past life in middle school. Actually, me and one of my friends, that is a year older, started a DJ company. And by the time we were in middle school, there was literally a time where we DJ'd a wedding. I was like, I called them before. I was like, I don't think you know, we're 12 years old. This is kind of embarrassing. Anyway, we did it. And then, so we bought a lot of equipment. That was fun. That was the first time I like owned something. And then the third one is this. This is so random, but do y'all remember the little guy from Orbit, the Astros mascot? I used to have this thing that I owned, and I
That's a Houston reference.
Houston reference. So those are like the only three things I owned when I was little. So,
For the Astros. Okay. How are the Astros doing? Because we know this year it's Yankees, Dodgers. I haven't seen the Astros in a while.
Unfortunately, I just made this reference. I'm not a sports guy, but yeah, I don't know actually.
Very interesting. You see, John, there actually could be some reason behind the rhyme there. He was jaded by that acquisition, that early ownership experience. Like, the hell with these Astros.
Good point. Very good.
Not going to a baseball game again. Guys, I remain super excited about what you are all building at Mode Maison Labs. It's a vision for the future, and we know the future is happening much, much faster than most of us can comprehend. But I'm very optimistic, I think we all are at Metaversal, very optimistic that you guys are charting this unique course. I want to thank everyone for joining us on today's pod. To our listeners and watchers, thank you for tuning in. Know that we have some more amazing guests lined up in the near future. And so until next time, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks.